Sustainability Council. So I think our organizational missions align quite nicely in terms of what we're doing. And we really appreciate institutions like United. So I'll get us started. So this is the basic agenda. And what I'll do is as I go through the sort of presentation, I'll stop along the way and ask for questions. And basically, I'll sort of stop at each one of these agenda points. So I'm going to start out with a sort of mirroring back some of the visioning that you provided, because that has had a big influence on the design and the work that you've done coming into this point. Then I'll share some building context about where your space is, the building that it's in, the kinds of things that are influencing that. And then I'll shift over to design and go through the big ideas that have influenced the design, and then shift over to a more detailed look kind of on a location by location in the space. So I'll try and stop at sort of each one of those breakpoints and ask for questions. So about a month or 2 months ago, maybe something on that order, we really got sort of started on the design process, and we were really excited to find that you had done visioning and that you'd gotten together as a group and you'd pulled together your ideas. So the first thing we did was got photographs and images of the visioning work that you had done, and which has been really helpful. It's been very informative, and we've tried to take as much of that as possible and synthesize it in together with other issues like the building context, cost parameters, and a whole variety of things like that into a whole. And if you hadn't done this, this was actually going to be one of the very first things we suggest that you do. So you took the first right step. And basically along with taking a look at specific topics that you had in your visioning, we also look for patterns in it. So what you can see on the screen right now are all of the various sort of, and I don't know if you did this as specific groups or as individuals, but I'm assuming it was as groups, but you can see all the different patterns that were generated from each group together. And there were some things that came out of it. It was very clear that from almost 8 of these, that you were looking for some kind of centralized space, some kind of central place that you could gather and organize around. That was a common theme. So we brought that into our design thinking heavily and made that a strong emphasis. And I'll show you how that plays out in the design. And there were other things that came through as well. One of them was that we started to see that you were looking at the classrooms and the office space, whether it's faculty or admin, et cetera, as sort of like bars of space. You can see that show up as, there's a really good example. There's a classroom sort of component, there's an office component, and that really started to show up throughout a series of the patterns. Let's see if I can turn on there. See if that'll show up. I'm trying to turn on a cursor. It's not showing up. Well, I guess we'll have to do that without a cursor. So we also took a look at the survey information that you have, that you came back with, and went through that in detail. So there were a variety of things that came out of it. Just a couple of high points was it was very clear that you wanted a welcoming point of entrance. And someone to greet and say hi and help people get oriented to the space. That was really important. Another thing was that there was a strong desire for a cafe or coffee shop or food, and a sort of gathering around the concept of food that came through very clearly as well. And Another one was provision for diversity. That was a very clear indicator, and also universal design concepts. All of those things came through this information and information we gathered later. So there's the cursor. We don't have, it's not responding very well. So, all right, I guess we'll have to live without being able to point. That's going to be tough for me as an architect, not to point to things. All right. So one of the things that we do as a firm is we try to put together sort of essence of the organization and an essence for the design, because that helps give us perspective as we move into space. As you probably sort of recognize, space, it can't create a culture, but it can influence a culture. It can have impacts in the context. So we like to understand the really deeper cultural basis of where organizations are departing from, so that we can organize and bring the space together in a way that best reflects that. So I'm going to read these because they're not really intended to be paraphrased. And this is, once again, this is our perspective as architects. It's sort of the way our lens that we're applying to it. And this is what we came away with as the essence of United, that it's preparing spiritual leaders within the new emergent paradigm of ministry. Hey, we've got some monsters living out in the ether. Yeah, right. Maybe I don't have this essence correct.
You have an essence.
You have to let me know if I've got something wrong here, because I'd rather that the ether not let me know. You should let me know. So back to the essence. It's preparing spiritual leaders within the new emergent paradigm of ministry. It's kind of the takeaway. And then for the design essence of United, the new United design should be representative of the ministry space of tomorrow, which means it's spatially inclusive, communal space, and connectivity are key elements to that. And that's where sort of moving essence to design and how that starts to influence space. And the chapel or the church was physical sacred space in the past, and that boundary is now expanding to be more inclusive. So as you'll see in the design, we started imagining that your design has a chapel in it. You also have a great hall, and in some ways that great hall has a sacredness to it as a whole. So we started imagining that as a more completeness in terms of that kind of space. And then from there, we get much more tactile or strategic in terms of where we're headed. And these are some basic design drivers: inclusive and radical hospitality, and building community over shared meals. So that became a really central theme of the design, was having food as part of who you are, what you're doing, and breaking bread was essential. Art making and displaying were critical, and we've identified places for art. And I think we're starting to create a more robust opportunity for the making of art in the space as well. A sacred space for diverse religious identities. There's a prayer room, meditation room that's included. We also have gender inclusive toilets, et cetera, and I'll show you where those things are. Sustainability and care for the earth. So the design is green. It takes into account green and healthy aspects relative to the material selections and energy efficiency, those kinds of things. Student-centered teaching and learning, comfortable space, functional classrooms. There's lots of student gathering areas and enhanced technology capabilities. So those are all part of it. And then, as Lou pointed to earlier, balanced teaching space with administrative space, balancing those two needs together. If you have a space constraint, we have a maximum amount of actual space that you can lease, and we need to get that to function for you as a whole in the best possible way. So I'll stop there for a moment and ask for any questions that you might have. All right. And I'm going to move on to some really nitty-gritty kinds of things like the schedule, which Lou touched on the schedule as well. So, but basically, September 10th right now is our big sort of date that we're looking at. We'll publish what we call a permit set. The contractor will use that to start ordering materials, and they'll actually start construction on September 10th. So things are coming up really fast. And construction will take 3+ months to complete. And this is almost more than a goal. It's something that really kind of has to happen. December 31st is when the construction needs to be complete, because you need to open classes on the 16th. I think I have that right, the January. So I point those things out because you may, if something isn't really, really critical to change, you'll get pushback from those of us that are trying to provide you with a space by those dates. Okay, so a little bit of building context. Jump into that. All right, so right now, Unite is in sensitive negotiations on the space, so we can share with you the context, but we can't share with you the exact location of where it's at. So basically, it's a somewhat urban. It's an urban location that, as Lou and leadership has described, for me, really fits the need for where you're headed. Puts you in a good position to serve your clientele, and those types of things. And Lou, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to the general sort of intent of location.
I think the key elements of location is that it's easily accessible, that it's available. Mass transit is easily available. One of the things we've heard from prospective students is that you need a car to come here, and we don't want that to be the case. We also think there's an environmental reason not to have to be here by car. We also want to be able to provide as many community-based opportunities for learning and leadership as we can, and doing that in a community space. So we have been looking, as we've talked about, along University Avenue, particularly in the 280, 94 University Avenue, that general area, and I think if things continue, that would be where the space is.
Great, thank you. So sort of a general look at the space. Even though it's an urban location, you do have some green outdoor space. So this photograph on the left starts to sort of show you that space. Right now, that space is under construction, so it's just earth. It's been graded. That'll actually be landscaped, and we're headed towards some patio space, and you can see the shade and the trees. That'll all be visible outside of your space as well. So from the location, based on the location, you're going to have a nice outdoor green space to go with your new location. And then the building is, it's about 180,000 square feet overall. It's a one-story building, and it was previously a warehouse. It actually has some really nice volume, which I'll show you some photos of it, which is a great gift for the building to offer, and we can really take advantage of that. So there's some great opportunities in the building for your space, and some real, tactical things. There's two parking areas. One is a controlled access area, and that's on the north plan north. And essentially, that'll be for students, staff, and faculty parking on a regular basis. And then on Plan South, there's visitor parking. So if you were coming to visit, you would park on the south. And your space is an L shape. You can see that in the black sort of shape. And there's a direct entrance into your space off of the controlled access parking for students, faculty, and staff. And then if you're a visitor, you'd come in the south entrance, and then you would go up a commons, a large sort of commons atrium space that's maybe up to 30 feet wide. It's pretty gracious. I have some images of that we can show you that the landlord has provided. And then there's a very intentional visitor entrance for your space as well, and I'll show that in more detail. But both of the entrances are welcoming, and they both will have opportunities for receptionist locations. And I don't know if Dale Dale's in the back. Dale and the librarians will act as one of your receptionists, and we'll show you that in a minute. And then there's another one where some of the administrative student services staff would act as receptionists. So this is actually an image of the building without having any, right after it was all cleaned up on the inside. So you can see it's really has some really nice volume to it. And it has some nice architectural features on the inside that we can take advantage of to create a very sort of intriguing and unique space for you. It has an industrial feel, so we'll be playing with that in terms of how the design works. And your space is actually shown in this location. Since I can't point, I'll try to describe it. That yellow line that you see approaching you, if you were to take that yellow line and run all the way to the very back in this photo, you'd run into your entrance door, basically. And there'll be more windows. They're cutting more and more windows into the building every day. And you'll see some of those in the upcoming photographs. So here are, at the upper left of this slide is a rendering that the landlord's architect put together for the common space, for the common atrium that runs the full length north and south of the space. And actually the entrance to your space is just to the left of that. If you see the orange tractor, it's actually back in the back of that, sort of in the center of that rendering. You can sort of see it kind of in the back. Your entrance is just off where the orange tractor is shown in this space. So it's a really nice space. It's got some great skylights that are going to be cut into it. And the space as a whole already has a whole series of skylights in it that we'll be taking advantage of. Now, the photograph below that is actually, was about 6 weeks ago. And that was actually on site. You can start to get a feel for the scope and scale of that commons area. So this is actually a more close-up photograph of your space. And if you look at the red lines that are on the image, you'll see there's a dashed line that kind of runs around the perimeter of the space and through the brown color. That's actually the grade on the exterior of the building. So, and you'll see the little ellipse in the far corner, that's an existing door that comes into your space. And then there's a photograph, a smaller photograph towards the bottom that shows that door, and you can see how you can sort of start to see where the grade is relative to it. So that's the door you would use to go out to the patio. And when you enter the space, you'll be up a little bit higher. And that's going to offer a really sort of great vista back to your chapel. And I'll show you that in a little bit, how that would happen. So we know that has some universal access topics involved with it. So we've taken that into account. And we have a really gentle and gracious sloped floor access to get you down. And I'll show you that in the plan. You might think of it as a ramp, but it actually isn't a ramp. It's lower slope than that. And it's really for everyone to use. So when you come into the space, that'll pull you back into the space.
Similar grade slope to the entrance into Bigelow Chapel. For those of you who remember that, that's not a flat surface.
This is a bit of space that's being built out already in the project, so you can see the construction that's there. There's sort of a white structure in the middle. That's actually an office that's being built out, and you can see that the top of that is down below the bottom of the steel trusses. So that's the basic sort of concept that a lot of the space in your space would feel like. The walls won't go all the way up to the roof. They'll stop short. So you'll have basically buildings within inside of a building. And that's how we'll take advantage of all of that volume. And you can also start to see the skylights that are in the roof. You'll see them as bright spots on the ceiling. You'll see them as bright spots on the floor. So by having the ceilings and the office space and classroom spaces down, the entire space will be able to take advantage of that daylight that comes in through those skylights. I'll pause right there and see if there are any questions before I go into sort of big ideas. Please feel free to ask. Otherwise, the monster's going to come back and ask questions. Yes.
Do you know who might be in the other parts of this building?
Oh, that's a good question. Who else will be in other parts of the building? Actually, Mark may know more. I don't know if you do or not. But I know one tenant is Kimberly Horn, and they are a transportation and urban planning group. They'll be probably adjacent to you in one space. There's actually a small craft brewery in the building as well. And there's a desire by the landlord to make sure that the location, the building, the space around it is well connected to the other urban fabric that's around it, so that it has a good connectivity. It's not isolated. So I don't know who else might be. Mark, do you know anyone else that's in it?
The landlord's in negotiations. We don't know who they are yet.
Okay, so we don't know who else is there.
Will there be any signage on the outside furnace?
That's the plan is to have banners actually, and I'll show you that. That's a good question. So we're looking at a banner pole basically, so that'll give it some spiritual feel as opposed to just a sign stuck to the face.
I really like the skylights being cut in, like, bring light into the
Right.
which is especially nice for the common spaces, creating really nice effects. Will there be workspaces or skylights directly over workspaces? Might that impact direct light coming down on the workspace?
That's a good question. We'll take a really close look and see where the skylights are, and if we need to, we can put some filter fabric, hang filter fabric below the skylights to soften that and diffuse that some. So that's a good question. Appreciate that.
How about the outside patio? Is that only for our use or other businesses there?
That's still a negotiation as to whether it'll be universally available to other folks or whether it's specific to United. So I can't answer that. And some of that's going to depend potentially on the cost of your lease.
Could be a common space.
It might be a common space. So.
But it's immediately adjacent to our spaces, so there's nothing to have to walk to get there.
Right. So if we were planning an event or whatnot, it would just maybe be on office hours, and the other businesses are not.
That's an excellent question, and I think Mark should take that back to the landlord. I'm saying that in jest, but it's actually, hey, that might be something to talk about if you're not having those conversations, like how is that space utilized? It's a great question. Oh, and I need to repeat that. How would the patio, so it goes on the recording. So how would the patio how would it be available to United, and Could it be available for specific events, those kinds of things, right? And I think, so having some negotiation on that would be good. Yes.
I also really like the skylight and the open top, but how does that affect sound?
I don't think it shouldn't have any impact on sound. Are you concerned about airplanes or?
No, I mean like if the wall doesn't go all the way up to the roof, like other sounds.
Right. So the question is acoustics and how are you controlling sound in the space if the walls don't go all the way up. So the ceiling actually, there's a ceiling in every space, and the walls will go up just a little bit above the ceiling, and the ceiling will seal really tight to all the walls. And then for your classroom spaces, we're using what's called a high noise reduction coefficient on the tile. So that'll improve the sound, sort of stopping the sound from leaking out the top of the classrooms. So good question.
Good idea, given our food knowledge.
Yeah. All right, I'm gonna keep rolling, try and keep us moving along. So I'm gonna hit big ideas in terms of what's there. So back again, once again to the just for a second to the visioning sessions that you did and the idea of a central space. So I want to show how that's played out in the as we go forward. So this is a sort of a diagrammatic of your space, and you'll see across the top, running from right to left, is that's really the educational space, and we're calling that for the moment the Grand Hall. So, and you'll see on the far right of that is it says student parking entry. So there's a vestibule and an entrance at that location, and then to the wing that runs north-south is really your administrative area, your student services, faculty offices, etc. North is to the right. So I'm using plan, sorry about that. I'm using plan north. So north is up when I say north and south is down. And if I could point, I would, but I can't. So I'm having to use descriptors language descriptors. Yeah. Are you looking for real north? Real north is to the right side of the plan. Student parking is real north. And where it says patio, that's real west. I'd like to use what we call plan north and plan south, where north is up, because that's most people orient themselves that way. If that's okay, because I'm going to get really confused. My brain is going to want to do that. Speaking. So across the bar across the top, and you can see the chapel in the upper left of this slide is in orange. So that bar is that's all of your educational spaces there. Library, chapel, intersection, classrooms, student spaces, all those things are located there. And then right at the intersection of both the bar that runs sort of north-south, your administrative bar, and your education bar is where you have some basic functions, such as your workroom, so that you can come quickly to the workroom from the classrooms, et cetera, or you can get to it from admin. The restroom facilities are there, and then the archive for the library kind of run across that space. And you have a guest student visitor entrance plan south. You can see that marked on and our goal is to make that very welcoming and inviting. So you have two inviting entrances to the space. So I just changed the slide a little bit. So there's a blue circle. So that blue circle is sort of outlining what we're starting to call the fellowship center of the space. So this is really anchors the overall space, and it includes your chapel. It includes intersection that you currently have. There's catering, what we're calling a catering kitchen. And then there is a dining space associated with that as well. And then there's your meditation room and prayer room. So those things are all brought together as one centralized sort of unit and interactive space, right? And then things work off of that. The wings go to the right for the education and they go to the south for admin. So that's where you really come together as a group. It's also where you could have events. There's enough open space there to have events and bring guests and do a variety of things. And I'll talk in more detail about that as we go forward and how that works. So then the next slide, the ellipse is actually showing the other centralized space, and that's using your library as a fundamental centralizing element for the education space. It provides openness. It's an opportunity for a lot of openness. And the chapel and intersection and all the classrooms and the student spaces all circle around that. So you've got really two sort of centralized kinds of spaces that are going on, our centering spaces. So I just changed the slide again, and this slide is starting to show the vistas that occur when you walk in off the student staff entrance. So when you walk in from the right, you'll see there's a little circle showing. If you were to just stand there, you're going to be about 30 inches higher than the rest of the floor. So you're just about the height of this table above the remainder of the space. And you'll actually be able to sort of look across the space and you'll see there's one arrow that points to the orange square or the chapel up in the corner. That'll be the end wall of the chapel, and that's intended to be an art wall. And that'll be highly visible, and it's a very important sort of visual moment in the space. So that's going to be fairly good size. It's going to want a nice, robust piece of art that says a lot about who United is, would be the preference. And the other arrow, the other main arrow that's running east and west, points all the way to a circle at the other end. So at that point, that's kind of a termination of this axis that runs down the center of the Great Hall. And you can imagine your grand piano could set there, or it could be wheeled into the chapel, either one, so you could see that as you come into the space. And you'll see there's a little small orange rectangle that's inside that left circle. So that's an opportunity for some symbology, possibly a cross or something of that nature, that really sorts of terminates that grand hall with something powerful. Then you'll also see running plan north, plan south is a dash line with some arrows on it. That sort of indicates the view and sort of access that for our visitors. So visitors would come in and they actually will have a view all the way out your space and out the window into the green space in the back. Now it's a distance. You're not going to immediately say, oh, I'm looking to the outside. But, you know, on a nice sunny day, that's going to be a bright spot back at the end of your vista. It's not just a dead end view. And as you move forward, it'll get more and more clear as you move into the space. So it'll draw you back into the space. Just a little bit of what you'll see is that there's a wall that basically between the admin space, or between the restrooms and the, when you move into the space, you'll see this, between the restrooms and the education area that goes all the way to the deck. So we have to do that for building codes. The building codes are requiring us to divide that space. But there's a little pair of doors that will be in that wall. When I say a little pair of doors, it's 8 foot wide, they're 9 foot tall, and then it'll have actually fire rated glass that goes all the way to the deck. So that will be this tall sort of vertical, inspiring sort of vista as you come in as a visitor. Okay, I'm going to move to the next slide. So this slide actually starts to highlight sort of cafe, coffee, food in terms of how that works. The catering kitchen is the rectangle on the bottom, the lowest one, that's right at the circle. And that actually would have, microwaves, dishwasher, refrigerators, those kinds of things in it. And there's a harvest table there, a big harvest table. And then if you go up, plan north, you'll see there's another large harvest table and some smaller gathering spaces. And then if you move your eye to the right towards the student parking entrance, there's another rectangle at that location. So that's actually a living room space for students. So you can imagine all of those spaces are places where you would partake in food. So from a cafe, coffee house, there's not a coffee house like a Dunn Brothers or anything inside this space, but there's certainly coffee and drinks. So that living room space, you might take your coffee over to the living room space and hang out. And that's really a kind of a student type of space. And then we'll talk about it some more, but the chapel and the intersection all have opportunities to open up. So you can actually open those spaces up, and that can become one big communal space, interactive space. All right, so I shifted to another slide. So this slide is showing some diversity, cultural diversity spaces. The rectangle around the little orange spot is showing the location for your meditation prayer room. So that's a meditation prayer mother's room. Collectively, it's a relatively decent size. So it'll have a counter in it. It'll have a sink, probably have a little under sink refrigerator for mothers serving them. And then it's big enough that you'll be able to do meditation and prayer. And the sink and refrigerator will have a little distance from you. So I think it's going to feel fine being a multitasking space. And then the rectangle to the next rectangle down that's around the blue restrooms starts to show, highlights that. And essentially, there are two accessible restrooms, ADA accessible restrooms that are gender inclusive. And so basically, and those are on the left. So basically the way it works is you would come into sort of a vestibule space. And so you would be within a certain amount of privacy, you can choose whether you're going to go into a gender inclusive restroom or whether you go to the multi-fixture men's room or multi-fixture women's room. So it provides for privacy around that, and it provides for that inclusivity. We've our firm has looked at this pretty a lot, and we've mixed together various factors to kind of come up with this sort of general approach. The gender inclusive ADA restrooms, and then multi-fixture restrooms that are men and women specific, and they don't have ADA access in those. So we mixed together three factors. One is the inclusivity concept, the space actually that's required to do that, and then a green actually. And the green is that if, I'll just say it straight out, we can be much more water efficient as men using urinals than using toilets. So we've mixed all that together to come up with this sort of what we think is an optimized solution for that. Okay. So back to a piece of visioning. This is back to your sort of classroom administrative function. And so this slide shows, in really simple terms, the big circle, that's your central space. Once again, back to the fellowship center in the middle. And then there's classrooms that go to the east, and then administrative to the south. And they work off of that fellowship center as a whole. And then reception. Starting on the top education bar, if you take a look at the student parking entrance once again, there's a circle right there and an arrow that points to the left. So when you walk in, you're going to be able to very clearly see the librarian desk from that location. And you can see that the ramp down sort of ends up right down at the reception or at the librarian desk. So that's very much the reception space for the education wing. And then if you move your eye to the bottom of the slide, you'll see it says guest student visitor entry. So there's an entry point there, and there's two rectangles. There's a bigger rectangle that sort of encompasses the whole entry space, which includes 2 small meeting rooms, some seating, and then there's a reception desk in the smaller rectangle right there. So that gives you 2 moments of presence, regardless of which entrance you come into. There's someone to greet you. Okay, so I'll go back to the slide and I'll stop right there, and before I go into more details and see if there are any questions.
So the bathrooms you described, those are the only bathrooms for the entire space?
No, and let me repeat the question. The question was, are those the bathrooms that are shown on the plan, are those the only bathrooms for the space? And those are 2/3 of the bathrooms that you'll have available to you. There's another group of toilet rooms and restrooms that are part of the base building, and you'll have access to those. But in really simple terms, there'll be about 2 more fixtures for each gender available there. So you have quite a few restrooms available. And actually, when I say that, that's only technically. You'll have a whole bunch of other restrooms available to you in the base building. And the way you might be using them, which are sort of high capacity moments where you have classes coming out, a lot of the other tenants are office or probably office oriented, and it's very unlikely you're going to have the same peak loading happening. So you'll have these restrooms and probably 5, 6, 7, 8 fixtures per gender on top of that, as part of, maybe more as part of the base building. So anytime you're breaking out of classrooms, you should have plenty of restrooms available. Yes?
If there were to be a meeting about this size with this many people, where would it take place in that space?
It would take place, and sorry I can't point, so I'll describe it. Oh, there it is. It showed up. It just happens to be right there where the red dot is. Oh my gosh, it's actually moving. So it's right where the red dot is. So that's a space that is probably not quite as big as this room, but it's pretty good size. It's about, it's over 1,000 square feet. And depending on the way it's arranged right now, it's seating at least 28 to 30 people. And you could get more people in it if you wanted to. And then the other thing that you could do we can move into more detail and I'll show you this, for like an all staff meeting where you might have a really larger group of people. The chapel has garage doors on it that will open up, and the space where you can see like the grand piano, that space in front can actually be used as part of the meeting space for the chapel. And intersection has a garage door on it that can open up as well. And if you really wanted to get big, you could actually sort of use that entire space for a meeting. And I'll show some more detail on that. Yeah. Yes?
It looks like there's a little structure inside the door here. What is that?
There is. So the question is, it looks like there's a little structure right at the student parking entrance. So there's 2 things there. One is just a standard entrance vestibule, so which is the rectangle on the bottom. So that helps to control cold air and hot air coming in and out of the building when people enter. And the little rectangle to the north is actually a huddle room for students. So it's an enclosed little meeting space for the students. Yes?
I'm presuming that the guest and student visitor entry is not secured necessarily. It would be secured like before and after hours, but is there controlled access at the student visitor entry? or at the student parking entry, or is it all relatively non-controlled access?
The answer to that is it could be. And Mark may have more input on this, but basically right now the intention is to have card reader access. And if you decided that in years to come or after you move in that you want to have the space open during business hours, you can just control that with computer preferences and the door will be unlocked during whatever hours you want it to be. If you decided, that you in fact want to have that secured, you can do that. And because the students, anybody that's coming to the student entrance or staff, faculty entrance will need a card access to get into the parking lot. So Mark may have other knowledge than what I'm about to say, but it would be my understanding if you have that card could be applied to the door as well, entrance to the space.
It's still going to get worked out, but there's no one is there that we could do whatever I want to.
Yeah.
But there is some kind of controlled access to the parking space you can create in this building. Yeah.
It has a drop arm and you have to swipe it or touch it or whatever, however the specifics work on the card.
Super well.
The visitor, now that's why there's a visitor's entrance, which is not access controlled. So yeah, you're unique in the building in that you have your own point of entrance. So that's being done very specially for you.
Well, these are really nitty gritty details, but swiping the card to get into the parking lot, how about accessible parking there and with enough room to put a ramp down? The door's going to be open automatically, even if I have to swipe a card.
Right.
Is there going to be a push?
Yes.
To get the doors open?
Yes. The question is there accessible parking with ramp, fold down ramp access, and then for the entrance door, is it automated? And the answer to both of those would be yes. There would be accessible parking near your location. I'm sure that's part of the negotiations that are going on. And then
my experience is sometimes when people say, oh, there's accessible parking, right, the ramp space is like this.
Oh, I can see that. That would be
which is actually what's here, but
right,
luckily we're known enough. People actually know. Give me a little bit more space, because we're the only folks here, and people get to know each other. But yeah, so I have very specific concerns about parking and doors, and bathrooms.
Right.
The one bathroom I can use here is down at the chapel, because it has an automatic door, and the bar is at the right height and on the right side. And even though I'm sure it's ADA compliant, the stall door doesn't actually shut all the way. The room with my power chair.
Oh, right.
So I have really, very nitty gritty, probably not.
That's okay. These are important. These are important topics. So I think I have a close up of the restrooms. We can talk about that some, but I'm not sure if I have a real close up of it. Generally, accessible restrooms are single occupant. So, and they're about 8 foot, roughly 7'6" by 7'6", or almost 8 by 8. And they have a full 5 foot diameter turning radius inside the space. So it's unlike going into a multi-fixture restroom. This is an actual single occupant restroom. So I think you'll find it more spacious than a multi-fixture space. And we'll take a really close look at that too to make sure that that's true.
And as long as we're doing these details, that bathroom also works because of the tile on the floor. It's small with a lot of foot.
Yes.
And so it helps with reduced slipperiness. If tiles are bigger,
3 by 3.
there's more, and those are like a ½ inch.
So that gives you more texture. Oh, okay. Well, I learned something new. Thank you. So I see Mark's taking a note there. So I appreciate that, Mark, that you're putting that down. So these are, and those restrooms are sort of, they're very centrally located in the space. They're not at one extreme end or the other. So they're sort of balanced in terms of where their location is as well. So, yeah, and yeah, absolutely. Thanks for bringing that up. And I'm hoping Mark took a note down about negotiating the ADA space right at the. All right, so we have about half an hour. Is that correct? So I think we're doing pretty good on timing. Is there any last questions about this before I jump into detail? Yes.
The walls in the classrooms,
Right.
are they movable or fixed?
They're fixed. Right. Movable walls, just to share a little bit more, are pretty expensive. No, they're not pretty expensive. They're very expensive. So, and they tend to, unless you get the really expensive ones, they tend to leak noise. So, and we also find overall, they don't get used as much as you might imagine. So, but you do have a pretty wide range of teaching spaces, and I think that'll show up in some of the details in terms of what's there. Yes.
As we talk about art, are the walls that along the classroom space, are those available for art, changing art?
There are walls that are available to art. The ones along the classrooms are not. Those are mostly glass. And the reason and I'll show that to you in the detail, there aren't any windows because they're interior rooms. If we don't put glass on the what you would think of as the corridor side, they're going to feel pretty claustrophobic. But there are some really strong opportunities for art, and those have been, we've actually thought about that intentionally, and I'll show those to you as we walk through. Yes.
Will you show us how many students can be in which classrooms and how it's configured?
Yeah, I can kind of walk you through that, but you should know that the classrooms are pretty flexible, and we're in the process of working through different scenarios now, sort of. So I can show you what we mapped out. They're very generic. What's there now is just sort of generic. And then we're using your existing furniture, your existing furniture in the classrooms. So I think I'm gonna move us on to some more detail. And I'm gonna start with the Great Hall, kind of walk through that a little bit. This is gonna be particularly challenging since I can't point. So I might, it's just not moving. That cursor's just not moving. So I'm going to start on the right side and go to the left at the red triangle. So, at the red triangle, that's where you would enter off the parking lot. You can see there's the entrance vestibule there. Those doors would have power operators on them with a paddle that you would touch and to let you in. And you're going to walk right into essentially the student center. So you can see there's some living room furniture to the north. There's a student huddle room, etc. Breakout space. And the other thing that as you walk into the space, the slope floor or ramp is immediately present as well. So that's actually pretty wide. The ramp is, when you come into it, is upwards of 8 feet wide. So it's very gracious, and it doesn't express itself like it's a specific ADA ramp. It's expressing itself very clearly that it's for everyone to use. And it's just a basic part of the space. So as you go down that, there's a landing about midway in that ramp. And then it actually ties you back into the computer lab space. So the space steps down in 2 tiers. It's 30 inches high. It steps down about 18 inches, 15 to 18 inches, and then it steps all the way down to the lower level. So once you come down the ramp and you get to the end of the ramp, which is about in the middle of the space, then you're greeted by the librarian desk. That'll be your existing librarian desk. We're bringing that over.
I'm listening into the thing, so.
We're getting volume on.
Do we have folks that are having challenges on the other end? Is that what I'm hearing?
I just wanted to kind of give you a heads up about that. It seems like she is zeroing even more. It's got to be residential. It's got to be male. It's got to be cognitive behavioral. And totally appropriate.
There we go. Thank you. So the library is to the north of that, and you'll see that there are stacks. So your current library stacks are going to be turned into mobile stacks, right? They'll be on tracks, and you'll close them, open them up. And there are two basic main stacks. There's a little workspace there for the librarian between the two of them. And then to the end of that is the dining area that's spun off from catering. And there's the harvest table that's right up next to the chapel. That's the long one. And then there are 2 or 3 smaller tables. So those are for dining, but they also serve the library, right? So if you're not eating, that's where you would hang out for the library. And then on the other end of the library is this living room space, right? So basically the library is now flanked by 2 spaces where you can read, et cetera. I think there's Dale. Dale and I were talking yesterday about the library, and we were starting to imagine the idea that you might actually, and I don't want to steal Dale's thunder, but we were kind of bantering back and forth, that the library would provide and display materials throughout this space. So there might be materials from the library that are marked, don't take them away, that are in the living room space. You might have, sort of using Dale's term, ephemeral materials that would be in the catering kitchen. Maybe there's special newspapers, all sorts of things like that. So that in essence, what is the knowledge of the library becomes a very vital part of your space, and is really threaded throughout everything. So when you arrive here as a student, and I would propose that if you arrive here as an academic, you're immersed in the knowledge of the seminary, and it becomes a special place partly because of that. So moving out of the discussion on the library, to the left is the chapel up in the corner. And then intersection is the square room that's sort of kittywampus that's at an angle right there. So one of the ideas is that intersection is spatially and physically at the intersection between chapel and your classrooms. It is literally at the intersection in this plan. And well, I've got a blow up of that area, so we'll talk a little more detail in that. All across the south, the lower plan are where your classrooms are. And we'll go into more detail on the classrooms. And then that's the little space right in the middle that sort of has the dashed lines, it's kind of busy right there. That's the catering kitchen. So food is right at the heart of your space. And it's open, there are no walls around it, it's just open. Questions on the Great Hall? Oh, and I want to add too, I've got photos down at the bottom of your existing space. So so if you look at that photo that's running across the bottom, you can see a skylight kind of to the right or to the left over towards the windows. That sort of volume, that long volume, that's where the library sits. It's right there, if you can imagine that. And then your classrooms are to the right side of that. There's a series of columns that are running down the center of that image. So your classrooms, the ramp runs down the right side of those columns, and then the classrooms are a little farther over. So that gives you a feel for where all those things are located in that space. And your door, once again, is at the far end, but there'll be windows there, but they're just not cut into the building at this point. Okay. Oh, yes.
How might the height of book stacks, how might they affect the light coming in?
Well, they're probably 8 feet tall, so they will have some impact on the views and the light out. But the light will sort of, there are some vistas straight through. So if you look at the stacks, sort of the gray areas are fairly solid. At the right end, you'll be able to look right out the windows through the living room and out that space. Then in between the two stacks, we've those stacks and the workspace there are actually absolutely centered on the window. It's just north, so you can stand, let's say on the ramp or outside, you'll be able to look right out the window through those two. And then when you go to the dining space where the harvest table is and the 3 little tables that's to the left, there's windows right there that you'll be able to look out. And then if you take yourself all the way down to the chapel, depending on how you manage the chapel with the garage doors, you could have the garage doors basically open most of the time, and you'll have views out of those windows. So there will be I won't say there's not an impact on the daylight, but the stacks are pulled away from the glass. As you can see, they're not right up against the wall, so the light can still pour into the space. And you'll be able to sort of, in some ways, look around them. But overall, that's probably the best thing to put out in that space is the library. And it's just the nature of what the library is at this point. So.
Doors, are they opaque panel? Are they glass panel?
They're glass panel garage doors. I have some photos I'll show you in terms of spaces around that too. Let me go back. So you can see in a second there it is. Thank you for pointing at that. Those, the windows are to the left side of that little image across the bottom. I wish I could tell you exactly how tall they are. I think they're probably in the 9 foot to 10 foot high. Just about, yeah. So they're a little below that. So I don't want to overstate how tall they are, but they're pretty good size. Yeah, they're really not. They're nice. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to keep rolling here. So we don't have, because things are moving so fast, we don't have renderings of your space. So we're trying to pick up some example images. So this is from St. Olaf. It's a project we just recently completed. The reason I'm showing it is it's a classroom space, but it shows tiering. You can see how the classroom steps down, and you don't have a vaulted space like that. You have the other sort of trusses. But you can start to imagine when you walk into your space, the space is going to step down into the area. What's really different about this photograph, the classroom space, is it won't be solid walls. It'll be steel rails like the ones in the image on the right. So the tiers will just have very simple steel rails. You look right through it. So it's going to feel very open as you walk in. And here's a little blow up of what right now we're framing as the student center, just a kind of a close up of that. You can see the living room space. You can see the huddle room, little closed in huddle room, the breakout area, and then there's the door that takes you out to the patio. And right now we're hoping to have another door to the plan west into the library that will take you out to the patio as well. So you have sort of a little party loop that runs around there. And you can see the step downs from the living room into the computer lab, 3 steps basically down. And then there are steps that will take you down to it's not really a corridor, it's a walk aisle right in front of the classrooms.
So with the steps, what about accessibility for the students in wheelchairs?
That's what the ramp in the middle of the space is for right there, yeah. So that landing will connect you to the computer labs. And once again, it's more like the ramp that takes you down or the walkway that takes you to your existing chapel. It's really low slope. But that's not somehow we have to go from entrance grade down to the main floor. I mean, it's kind of it's a physical reality of the space. And we made that as integral, that travel path as integral to the experience of being in the space as possible for everyone. So here's a close-up of the library, just a quick look at it. You'll see, and you can see the ramp very clearly right there. You'll see that if you're not clear on where the ramp is, the word sloped floor 1 to 20 is a piece of ramp, and then there's a word rail, that's where the landing is, and then there's another piece of the sloped floor to the left of that. So once again, your existing librarian desk comes in, that'll be your reception greeter space. There's some areas wrapping the library where students can get materials and read. The librarian has a workstation and work area between the two stacks, and you'll be able to pass through that. And Dale and I had a conversation. In order to provide enough shelves for reference materials and other things, we're probably going to need to run some shelving below the window sills along that exterior wall. And you can display books on top of that, and that will actually be a draw to activate that area on the backside. Okay, I'm going to move on to classrooms for a moment. So I have some photographs that we're showing here. The photograph on the left, which shows, you've seen this image before, but basically your classrooms will be buildings within a building, right? They'll go up to about the bottom. They'll go up a little, they'll go up taller than that little sort of office that's showing. They'll go up almost to the bottom of the trusses, and the ceilings will be about 10 foot high in the classrooms. And they will have glass that runs all across the front walls. Right now there's intersection is not showing up here. I have another slide of that. So you've got intersection as a classroom of its sort of multi-purpose classroom. And then you have these 3 classrooms that are showing up. And then there is actually a conference room / classroom on the far right. It's really a conference room mostly. But if you, as you move into the future, if you need more classroom space, that's a flex space that you can use. It's up on the elevated floor piece, so it doesn't have as high a ceiling as the other classrooms. It's not going to be as strong of a classroom space. It does have a window in it, however. So you've got three core classrooms, and then of course intersection. Your 3 core classrooms have the 2 on the one on the left, the one on the right are at right around 640 square feet or so. They're going to serve 20 to 24 students pretty easily, and based on the classroom counts that we've seen, that probably is greater than your current largest occupancy, which is hitting maybe your 19 or 20 at the extreme. Right now, they're showing a couple of sort of generic layouts, and I've had some great conversations with Kyle about this, but this is really based on, right now what's showing is your Zoom arrangement, where you've got an instructor that's seated like I'm seated right now. There's a setup just like this room where there's a flat screen on both sides. And then the students, and actually in this case, the instructor is seated in line with the students. That may be something where we want to spin an instructor out, and we'll work out some concepts around that. We'll also work on lecture style, etc. So the idea is that you will have, these classrooms are flexible, and then depending on how you want to function, you might set them up for the semester, or you might rearrange them on an as needed basis. The way the sort of symbology that's in the classrooms on the right and the left, you'll see adjacent to the wall, there's a little vertical rectangle that's showing a flat screen. You'll see that there are some dashed lines that go past the word classroom. Those are the sight lines from the instructor's seat, and there's a little rectangle in front of it that represents a laptop. That's kind of what's showing there. We also know that you have small mobile carts, and you may want to do stand-up moments of teaching. So we're in the middle of sort of planning for that. Now, the big classroom in the middle there's really not a lot of detail shown here. It's just showing as a large seminar right now. So we're starting to have conversations about what kind of AV equipment goes in that space. How is it really utilized, essentially? So I'll stop there for a moment and ask for any questions that you might have.
How about storage? We were just talking about the carts with the TVs, other things that we need to store.
There's a workroom where you could probably store some things, but that's a really good question, and we should identify if we need some very clear usable storage for things that aren't in the classrooms. We will plan the classrooms to each one of I shouldn't say each one of them, at least the one on the right and left. I would assume the main classroom and probably intersection, you guys will have to tell us, would likely have a mobile cart. And the classroom will be sized and set up so you can just stay there. So hopefully we'll be doing limited amounts of external storage from classrooms so that you're not moving equipment around a lot. You may end up parking a piece of equipment in the classroom off to the side if you're not using it. Might be one approach. If you have a lot of other equipment that needs to come in and out, we need to talk more thoroughly about that.
Copier and postage.
Yes, I'll show you that. Yes, there's a workroom. There's a 200 square foot workroom, and that's located right at the knuckle between the classrooms and the administrative area.
In that workroom, is there storage for copier paper and pens and?
There is, yeah. There's quite a bit of storage for all those kinds of items in the workroom, and we'll have a focus meeting about exactly what that space looks like. Yes.
I know it's antiquated technology, but will there be either whiteboards or blackboards for the use of language instruction?
I would expect there are either one or the other or both, and it depends. We haven't gotten into specific questions about whiteboards or blackboards. Some folks like blackboards. We have the IT folks hate blackboards because they eat computers. The chalk is bad for the computers, but an example at Holland Hall at St. Olaf, we have blackboards on one side of the classroom and whiteboards on the other side, depending on what their preferences are. And the blackboards are on the side of the classroom away from the technology and the computers. You don't really have that exactly because you've got flat screens on both sides of the room. So we have to work out exactly what you're looking at.
But there will be some place where I can send 6 feet to the board to do paradigms or something.
I would recommend that. Yeah. I mean, I'm speaking now as someone that does classrooms design and those kinds of things. I would recommend that you have some whiteboard space or our marker board space. If you have to pick one or the other, I would personally recommend whiteboards. I think they're more universal. Yes?
This won't apply to me whatsoever, but I was going to ask it. Who cleans your space? Who does the maintenance of the space?
For this?
Yeah.
I don't know, actually. That would be I'd have to defer back to Mark or other folks. I don't know who's actually cleaning the space. So I'm gonna keep us kind of rolling on because I can see we've got 5 minutes and so I need to keep heading out. So I brought up some photos of, this is actually examples. These are the classrooms and seminar rooms at St. Olaf that we just completed in Holland Hall. So they have a pretty extensive amount of glazing. We put some film. It's more see-through than it actually looks like in this photo. We put some film on the glass to help sort of manage distraction, but there's plenty of open glazing. And in this case, you can actually write on the glass on the classroom side and use that film. You can actually use that as a whiteboard as well. It's a possibility. And there's marker paint or grease paint. You can see that showing up in the photo on the left. Use that very extensively throughout Holland Hall for students. And it's all over any number of breakout spaces. And if you were to go in that building, you'll see student scribbles all over the place. So, gonna keep going here. Fellowship Center. So this is, I'm going to use our office space as an example. Your space isn't going to be exactly like this or any of the photographs I'm showing. But basically, we just moved into a new space about 1.5 years ago. And we designed our space around community. So basically what we did was we gave up a personal space. None of us have extensive amount of personal space. In fact, all of us, including principals, don't have a dedicated space. It's all completely unaddressable. But, and we took the personal space that we would have had previously and we gave it to the community. So there's a lot of community space in our office. So here's some examples of the garage door concept. And what you're looking at is our main conference room and what you would think of as our cafeteria and our harvest table. And it's a big harvest table. It's made up of actually recycled scraps from our old desks because we literally cut our old work desks down from our previous space, used the scraps to make the table, and we have smaller workstations now. And you can see in the photograph in the upper left, the garage door is down. It's all glass. And then in the photo immediately below that, the garage door is up. And then the kitchen, the refrigerators, the sink, all those things are on the back side. And this is actually, if you come to our office, this is what you'll walk into first. We don't have a reception desk. You walk right into our cafe immediately. So it's very much about coming in and being in the space and sort of being right in the heart of community really, really fast. So in the little vignette plan on this image, you will see some dashed lines. If you look at the chapel, you'll see inside the chapel is the image of a piano, a grand piano in the sort of lower right corner. Ah, yes, thank you for pointing. There we go. So the chapel has a couple of garage doors that would open up, and on the south, plan south, and intersection has a garage door on plan north. And then it has a small garage door in the lower right-hand corner facing the catering kitchen. So you can open up intersection and chapel at the same time and have those be interactive spaces. You can populate that sort of large walk space between chapel and intersection with chairs, open up the garage doors, and have a sort of audience or meeting space with rows and chairs that actually faces north towards the class and get a lot of people seated there. You could open up the intersection and actually have people drop all the way to the back, or if there's AV in intersection, they could be looking at a flat screen at whatever's going on in the chapel, and then you've got food right there, you've got dining space right there. So you can have some really powerful meetings right in that space with everything you need in that location. Okay, and there's just a larger blow up of that. I'm going to keep moving through that, and because I'm running out of time.
If we open up the chapel and all that space for larger rooms, I guess this points to storage, we're renting chairs.
You do have some stack chairs, and we're looking at bringing those over. Right now, the plan is short on storage for those, so we'll have to provide some storage for those. Those are on carts, and I think those would be, we need to find a good place to store those, which...
Right. the number of chairs and tables that we're seeing is basically what we're gonna have unless we rent.
Well, you'll have the ones that are the stackable chairs, and I think the ones that are shown in the chapel, actually, that's a good question. I need to do a count. I don't know. We were showing 65 or 70 chairs, and I was assuming those weren't your stacked chairs, but they might be. So you might need to rent something or buy something if you do that.
210 stackable white chairs.
210?
And how many?
60.
So the chairs that are shown in the chapel, that's.
I'm sorry, 120 stackable white chairs. I was making a full count of all possible chairs.
Oh, okay. Right. Well, you have plenty. Yeah. And the wood chairs are about what's shown in the chapel now. So, yeah, we need to push through that a little bit more in terms of what's happening. There's a good point about that, about needing to make sure we have the right.
If we want seating, it looks like 10, 12, seating for 20 for lunch. And if we want to have a group meal, we're renting tables.
You have at least 20. You have 2 spaces for catering, or you've got a harvest table in the catering kitchen. You have a harvest table in the dining space. Then you also have spaces down in the student area as well. And I think if you wanted to have more than that, yes, actually, that's probably a good choice would be to rent some tables and bring them in if you want to have a really big event. Yeah, that's probably a really good choice. And you've got space to do that. There's some clear space out around the catering and dining area where you could add more. If you want to have a really big event, your space will definitely accommodate it, for sure. Yes?
Kitchen storage there, chafing dishes and all of that, we're probably renting.
Oh, if you have more, you might need to do that. But this will accommodate you on a day-to-day basis, I think, pretty well. Do you have a question?
Yeah, so I don't want to take too much time. I'm assuming that we'll have some more conversations about, I'm particularly I'm excited about the chapel space.
Right.
And the possibilities, and we can talk about logistics. How much capacity for chapel usually are you offering for seating?
Right now it's showing about 65 or 70 on a regular basis. That's the seating that's showing there. So that would be the normal sort of space. And I want to move.
We'd be happy if we can get to that.
I'm happy to answer more questions. It's a little after 10. I want to make sure that if anybody needs to go, that you feel free to get up and go. But I'll show the administrative area, and I'm more than happy to spend a little more time for anyone that has questions or wants to know more. I'm available for a little bit here. So this is the administrative area, faculty, staff area, and essentially it's there's a blow up of the entrance, the visitor entrance, and you can see there's a small meeting space in the lower left. There's another there's 2 meeting spaces immediately available there, the reception desk and some waiting space. Now there are 1, 2, 3, 4 basic small, quick huddle room meeting type spaces that are available right in this wing. So if you're doing consults with students, or you need some privacy, if you don't have a private office, that's where you would go, is to those kind of spaces. And then what you're looking at in the plan is there's the main aisle starts where the red rectangle is down at the bottom where you'd enter, and that runs all the way up to the educational space, and that's actually has a really high ceiling in a big part of that, so it's going to be very spacious visually. There's some offices just to the left of that. Some of those face into that main corridor, so that's for student services. So if you're a student and you come in visiting, student services immediately, it's sort of available to that space. And then the next thing over to the left, in the middle of that with all those seats, those are workstations. Those are 6x8 or 6'8" by 8-foot workstations. And I have some photos to show you that what we'd recommend on that. And then to the far left are faculty offices, which are 2 faculty per office. So basically, back to this idea of community and where the sort of the world is headed. Every institution is headed in this direction. We've been doing everything from laboratory design to classroom building designs to office building designs that are about community. And basically creating space for people to be together. And people are, over the past 20 years, have been slowly giving up personal space for community space. So in this particular design, everyone gives up a little bit of personal space. The private offices for Lou and other leadership are smaller. Faculty are doing double offices, and then some folks are headed for workstations. So it's kind of a universal sort of democratic approach to how space is allocated. Just to put a really simple baseline on it, in our office, no one has a private office. The principals don't have private offices. Even the lawyers don't have private offices. Everybody is in the open space. And if you want privacy, you go to a huddle room or a focus room or something like that. So it's completely democratized. All the public space, all the great views, everything is given over to people to just walk up to. So that's you're not going that far, but that's kind of the direction of where things head to. So here's a couple of photos to help you visualize that. Once again, this is one of them is our office. The one on the right, it shows some small focus rooms and meeting rooms that serve the open office areas. The photograph on the left is from St. Louis County Government Service Center in Duluth. And those are workstations. We would highly, highly recommend that you do not do tall, 5-foot tall workstations. There's a myth that helps with acoustics. It actually hurts your acoustics. And the reason being that if you are in a little box, you'll forget that you have neighbors around you. And when you're talking, your voice will just naturally go up. It literally does do that. And those walls do very little to stop the noise. The noise just pours right over the top. So you can actually make your acoustical privacy worse by doing tall cubicles. If you have shorter workstation heights, you're always aware that you're in a group of other people, and most people natively lower their voice in conversations. So it actually improves the acoustics. Plus, it's pretty miserable being in a small cube with tall walls. I mean, it's actually statistically and knowingly increases people's stress when that happens. You naturally, as part of who we are as human beings, we don't want to be in that environment. Being able to see more, having the right levels of protection to your back, the right levels of sight lines for eye contact established, that's actually works the best in terms of creating lower stress, friendlier communicating environments. So that's what we'll be looking for in terms of, the kind of space that you have going. And with that, I'll stop, and we're 10 after, so I'm happy to answer questions. Sorry, I know I'm running a little long, but I'm going to make sure we get everything out.
Why didn't we go as far as you did with Spaces Office?
Why did we not go as far? I don't know that I would recommend that for you personally. And it would be a huge shift for you. When we did our offices, as open as they are, we had been working in open office environment with with only a handful of private offices for 15 years. So for us to shift to a radically open environment was a shift for us, and we still had to make that change. It wasn't like over the top. For you to go from maybe mostly private offices and a few workstations to a radically open space, that might be a bit much for you to absorb as a culture. And then the other thing is that it might not actually work to exactly what you're looking to do. You do want to have some private consult with students and opportunities for that. So the dual faculty offices still provides for that. Although there may be times when if you have 2 people there, somebody needs to spin off to a workstation. I think the workstations, I would recommend that you go with as open a workstation as you can, though. It'll open up that space. I think you'll be much happier with it. And I think I would definitely encourage that. You can even do benching in those spaces, which is kind of what we have at our office for people that are maybe not there extensively. So I think those are some conversations, and that would free up additional space in your admin that might be valuable. So good question, great question.
With these different workspaces, accessibility, like I have just tables in my office, but they're raised up higher than this, so that my chair can clear them.
Yep.
And my seat is higher than most people's.
Right, right.
So are there going to be different heights of tables if I need to move out? And also I happen to work in HR, privacy of documents and having conversations. Will there be phones in these breakout rooms?
Yes. Yeah, there would be definitely kind of backing up out of your question about adjustable work or higher or custom workspaces to the phone conversation. There would be phones in each one of the smaller sort of meeting spaces. That would be vital. There's Wi-Fi available everywhere, so you should be able to take a laptop or a computer into those spaces. That's really important that be part of it. From a workstation standpoint, I think that's it's clear that if you have existing furniture that you want to bring with you, that would be something that could definitely happen in terms of the space. And I think there's a conversation to be had about how flexible particular desks are, if everything is operable up and down. If a few select spaces are that way, there is cost involved with that. We have the capacity to move easily, like have a motorized desktop that moves up and down is really important if you're going to have unassigned seating where people come and go. I adjust my desk when I don't have an assigned space. So when I show up in the morning, I adjust the height of my desk every day. It's just, and almost everybody in our office will adjust it an inch or two or something like that. And you adjust your chair because you're coming into a new moment that's not set up for you. So you're kind of like getting in your spouse's car, adjusting the mirrors, right? So, I think we need to kind of push the conversation a little bit around what kind of furniture is going to work best for you, where there are opportunities to change that.
For the workstations, are there the three walls and then one completely open?
That's kind of, sorry, let me go to the photograph, which I'm going to make you seasick because I'm going to go all the way through all these. Because it's at the very end, I think. Where to go? There it is. So the workstations that you're looking at in this photograph they have a taller spine that's just about head height and that goes between 2 workstations that bump up to it. And then you can start to see the glass panels that run parallel to the exterior glass. So you basically can sit, and actually for this office space, we actually face people to the windows so they could see Lake Superior. But basically, you can sit all the way back deeper into the space and look through people's workstations and that glass to the vistas outside. But there's a little bit of light screening between them. I think for your space, for your admin space, that blue center wall should be shorter. And you should be able to look right across the space. It's not that big a space. And I think you'll have plenty of privacy even if we bring that down a little bit in the center. I think the space will feel much better and less cut up if we do that. So this is always, defining exactly what that is, how much film is on your classrooms, how much film or screening is on the glass on private offices, all those things. Basically, you have to put your best empathic thinking on and become very human and think very closely to what it means to be with other people closely, and where does that line need to be around privacy? Because our culture has leaned into a heavy privacy, and relatively speaking, 4 walls, a door, all this kind of stuff for a long time. It's not very community rich. And we don't sometimes know how to behave in a more community oriented environment, or we don't even know what makes us comfortable and how we would be closer. So we have to think about that carefully. And it kind of depends on the culture and who you are.
So there are some of us that need quiet for their jobs for a good percentage of the time, and they can concentrate and do those kinds of things. This is not looking like it's real conducive.
It depends some of it will be your personal sense of what you're doing. And there is a change to it. We typically would propose, one, that there be sound masking in the space. That helps a lot. It's a pretty small area. I'll reflect on personally, I'm an introvert. And I work in a really intense, rich environment with folks. So there's a couple ways and I have to do heads down work as well. So there's a couple or 3 ways to handle that. One is sometimes to wear headphones if that's really distracting. The other one is the sound masking can help with that tremendously. The other one is if you really, really need to focus, then you grab one of those rooms, those small meeting rooms for a half a day. Right. So that may be something you need to, if you personally, because of what you're working on or what you're doing, you may need some sort of focused special equipment, or we may need to talk about how you have opportunities on at specific times when you know you're going to be doing very, very focused work, that you can hop into one of those meeting spaces and hold that for a little while. That's basically how we do it. If you look in this photograph that's on the screen, the photograph on the right side, you'll see some people that are seated inside of what looks like sliding doors. Those are focus rooms and people check those rooms out for a half a day at a time and go into those spaces to work. And it's fully equipped with monitors and screens and all the types of things that you would want to work with. So,
just to piggyback of Barbara's payroll, and so there are things on her screen that need to be kept private and confidential, where she's not going to be able to pop out into an open space, or stuff that she's going to need on her desk entering into a computer that needs to be kept protected. We should talk about it, like different strategies of where you're seated specifically, in terms of, whether the information is readily visible to folks, or whether you need maybe you need a slightly higher partition sort of condition. And I know these are really new things, and I can tell you right now, our legal folks were pretty freaked out about the idea that they were going to be in an open office space, and their monitors were going to be wide open to everyone. And our HR person had questions as well. So they've been in that environment for about 1.5 years now, and they're doing fine. There's some adaptation that went into how they work and when they choose to have things on their screen to be part of that. So I'm not going to tell you there's no change involved in how you work or how you think about your work. But what I would suggest is that we think, once again, sort of granular about how we solve that for your specific conditions, as opposed to universally saying everybody gets a private office, right? Because that doesn't meet all the other needs at the same time. So I think that's a conversation we should have in terms of specific needs.
Yes.
Different sort of question. There's a lot of glass and a lot of windows, and while that can open up a space, and this, I feel like there was only one wall that we talked about where there could be art, and it was.
Oh, art. I'm sorry.
Where is there?
Yeah, I was going to talk about that. So I'll just start right here and back up through things and quickly discuss that. Can't point, but I'll try to describe again. So if you were at the red triangle at the bottom, right? On the exterior of your space, if you start with the red triangle on the bottom of that, go to the left, all the way over to the left to the end of that row of offices, there's actually a branding wall there that is out to the common space. I call it a branding wall. That's for art. That's specifically an art location. Then if you work your eye towards the right, you'll see there's a couple of big rectangular blocks next to that red triangle. There's sort of a slot between it. That's for a piece of sculpture right there. And there's a piece of glass there, and that's sort of an entry moment. Then as you go up, as you start walking into the space, there's a meeting room. There's a small wall there. There can be a piece of art located on the south wall there. And then as you start moving further north, you'll see there are some offices with their walls to the corridor side. That can have art on it. Then as you continue to move up, there's a meeting room that has a solid wall towards the corridor. There's art opportunity there. And the restroom wall at the corridor side, the workroom wall, all those are art sort of potential spaces. And then as you move on into the fellowship center, if you were to make an immediate left towards the entrance for the toilet rooms, there's a corridor identified there. Right now there can be art along both walls of that corridor on the angled wall. Thank you. And then if you continue to heading towards the dining, once you start passing the intersection, there's actually a primary art wall right there on the end of intersection. Yes, thank you, that's perfect. And then if you continue to just keep walking towards dining, the end of the chapel is a really great spot for art at that location. There are some other spaces sprinkled around. Of course, the behind the grand piano is, I don't know that you would call the cross art, but it certainly is symbology. So there's a spot there for something really strong, possibly something at the meditation and mother's room area as well on that wall. And then as you move through other spaces, there are opportunities we can start playing around. Right now we're showing reference material shelving all the way along the library shelves. There might be a little carve out spot for a piece of artwork there within the shelving. The computer lab area where there's 4 chairs and the gray bench, there's probably room for small artwork right above those, so you'd see that when you enter. And then in the student center, there's a huddle room showing that has a solid wall that faces the living room. That's a very key potential piece for art in that location as well. So I think there's quite a few art locations available. Actually, the living room has a couch. It's just a rectangle, but it's a couch shown against the end of one of the stacks. There's a great opportunity for a piece of artwork there. So there are lots of opportunities, and we've thought about that as we went through about how would you enliven the space.
We have a lot of glass. We will have a lot of glass walls, which means every space is potentially a display space. All the classrooms, all the office space, because it'll be accessible to anyone who passes through those spaces.
Right. Well, and the glazing that's inside is really, really vital to have windows in the inside of the space, because you have windows to the outside, but it's not all the way around the space. So that internal glass is pretty essential. So we want to optimize that art space and interior glazing. So I'll take one more question, then I should call an end because we're half hour over. And I really appreciate the questions. I want to try and answer all your questions as much as possible. So you had a question.
Well, I don't know, maybe this is just a sort of Adam question, but as we were thinking about the possibility of taking a laptop if you need more privacy somewhere, and all the arts files that I use are on a server that, as far as I know, I can only access from my desktop computer.
That's gonna be good.
Okay, good.
All right. So I'm going to say we should stop. So I appreciate you all just staying a little longer than we had scheduled. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Plain bagels.
So question of the,
oh, I just stopped.
Where you can, Vanna White's.
How was I supposed to do it?
Yeah, you should.